Hi, friends. Welcome to lesson 5 of Unit 6. Notice that we skipped a lesson. That's okay. The previous lesson, lesson 3, was kind of a combination of lesson 3 and 4 together, so that's why it took a little bit longer. Okay. Our learning target today is to read our first chapter in our War of 1812 book, which is called Trouble with the British. Okay, Trouble with the British. Before we start our whole group read, I want to just bring you to a timeline that I created, and there is a link to this in the lesson plan document. But I want to kind of give you what's the word? Kind of a base for where we are. So the things that happened previously in our country and kind of the things that might have led up to the War of 1812. So I want to go through these really quick, and these will always be available to you if you would like to look at them. So let's start right here. We have 1492. This is when Christopher Columbus first found America. He didn't think it was America. He actually thought it was India. Because he was trying to find a shorter route for trade and travel. But actually, he landed in America. So that happened in 1492. And then about 200 years later, in 1620, pilgrims started to settle in North America. And pilgrims were people coming over from Europe. Okay. And then 1771, we have kind of this first major memorable incident where in 1771, the Boston Tea Party occurred. And that kind of helped start the American Revolution, where we decided to break away from Great Britain. You learned about that in first grade. I remember Mrs. Morrow talking about that. And then in 1775, this picture shows Paul Revere, who is warning the colonists of approaching British attack. So after the Boston Tea Party and a few other things happened, and our relationship with Great Britain was a little bit taxed. We were having a hard time. We weren't getting along necessarily the way that we had hoped to. So Paul Revere warns of British attack. And then 1776, we actually declare our independence so that we are free of British rule. And that ends the Revolutionary War. We get our independence, and we write that there in a document. Thomas Jefferson was one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence, as was George Washington, part of the Founding Fathers. There's actually 4 of them. We learned about those in the previous unit, in the previous lesson. This was all in 1776 that this happened. In 1787, the Constitution was written, and that was a new government framework for us. And it starts with we the people. So identifying what we the people want. Remember, we're leaving British rule. So we're leaving kings and queens and kingdoms where one person is always making all the decisions. And now we're moving more to a democratic society where a president is elected by the people. So we are ultimately helping to make the decisions. So that's a big switch for us. In 1809, James Madison is elected as the 4th president. And this is significant because the War of 1812 actually begins under James Madison's presidency. In 1810, we have the pioneers that were settled in the 3 colonies, and they're continuing to move westward. Westward expansion is occurring. They're wanting to gain land and property to try to earn more money for their families. And then on June 18th of 1812, James Madison actually declares war on the British. And so I'm going to stop there as far as the timeline goes, but I just wanted to give you a little background of kind of where we were and what we had been coming from, and kind of review that with you a little bit so that the story makes a little bit more sense to you, okay? So going back to our slideshow and Trouble with the British here. It says this is a whole group read. Obviously, we can't do a whole group read, so I have a couple different options at the end that we can talk about. When you open up your reader, remember this reader is going to be on the computer. You don't actually have the reader with you. I wasn't able to send that home. And the table of contents is going to be very important because you're going to have to scroll through the document to find the page that your chapter starts on. So finding the table of contents first, which is usually one of the first one or two pages, is going to be super helpful for you. Trouble with the British, if you look here, it says it's page 12, and then you're able to scroll down pretty quickly to get to page 12. Okay, so just a reminder that you're going to want to do that, especially with these digital readers. That'll save you a lot of time. Whoops. Let's review some tricky words. I'm going to go through these pretty fast because you guys are pretty good at tricky words. If you need to hear them again because you plan to read the story independently, just make sure you rewind the video and listen to them again, okay? First one is Great Britain, then Europe, Native, Americans, you hear the schwa there, war, signature, again, another schwa, okay? And then we go right into vocabulary. So not a whole lot of tricky words. Vocab today, we have British. British is a term that you use to identify people who are from Great Britain. If you are from Great Britain, you are said to be British. The middle picture is the US Congress, and that's a great picture of where our elected leaders make decisions and talk with the president and such. Declare war. That is when one side or the other says that they choose to battle because they can't come up with any other compromise or decision. Okay, they're disagreeing. Trader. A trader actually has two meanings depending on how it is used. A trader can be someone who is trading things like maybe I trade cotton for sugar. Okay, that I would be a trader, or often known as a merchant. A trader can also be someone who goes against like a treaty or against an agreement. So if I was sitting with my daughter and we made an agreement that we would not have any sort of treats until after dinner, and I snuck a treat before dinner, that means I was a traitor. I went against the decision that we had made. Okay. Army. An army is the branch of the federal government. They are part of the military and they fight on land. So Army is a branch of the military that fights on land. Navy is also a branch of the military, but they do their fighting on water, okay, in ships and boats. So that's the difference between Army and Navy. Impressment, hopefully you remember this term from our knowledge read aloud. Impressment is when the British ships would stop our US ships and steal all of the goods that were on them, including the sailors. Okay, when they were trying to steal the sailors and turn them into British sailors, we called that impressment. So it was almost like kidnapping, right? Except for they were adults, but they were actually taking these people off these ships and turning them into British navalmen. So that should be a term you remember. All right, last part before we actually get to the story. You have your choice today to read this chapter independently or to listen to me read it. Okay, I'll have a link that you can click on to hear me read it. Maybe you want to do both. Maybe you want to start by listening to me and then try it on your own independently. That's fine too. Remember that if you read something multiple times, all it can do is help you. Okay, helps your comprehension, helps your fluency. So feel free to do both. Okay, this is when we get to nonfiction, some of this is really deep and difficult content, and it takes a couple of times of reading it before you really get it in your head. Also a suggestion, if you are doing independent reading, please read it out loud. This is something we were struggling with before we left class, is reading out loud and making sure that we're fluent. A lot of you are really fluent when you silent read, and that's fantastic. But you need to make sure that you're able to do that when you read aloud as well. Okay, so please try and do that for me. I know that you don't love it, but it's a really, really good practice, and it helps you become a better reader. Okay, guys, we'll see you again soon for lesson 6.